Okay. Steven, you have the floor again.
Yeah, so I would like to talk about the music in this game. I want to focus on the new music because, as I already mentioned, a lot of music is reused, not remixed, not recomposed, not re-recorded, just pound for pound, just taken straight out of Breath of the Wild. And I'm not really gonna talk about that because, I mean, yes, it does add to the I guess the audio scope of the game. It's just doesn't really. It's not a very interesting thing to talk about. They reused assets. We kind of already mentioned that. But when it comes to the new stuff, this new main theme slaps. Oh my goodness. I am absolutely in love with the main theme for Tears of the Kingdom. I want to say the best game soundtracks are often the kind where the music fits the tone, style, and scope for the game that it's made for. And the composer for Tears of the Kingdom, who also composed Breath of the Wild, Minaka Kataoka, if I'm saying that right, she nails it when it comes to the new compositions. The sound design also is very strong. On the Switch, it does offer full 5.1 surround sound if you do have your dock hooked up to a system like that. There's things like the Bigorn sword. When you unsheath it, it's the exact same sound effect from Ocarina of Time when you unsheath the Bigorn sword there. That's a really nice detail. I don't mind it when they reuse assets like that when it makes sense. But I believe that there was even a part, there's a side quest where you are gathering musicians together to play for the Great Fairies, and the music they play there is done really well. I like the fact that Nintendo, despite the fact that they could have done this years ago and it took them, they're about 10 years too late coming into the idea of using fully orchestrated music in their games. I'm glad that they've embraced it. And with Zelda, they started with Skyward Sword, and anytime they make a new Zelda theme and there's a full orchestra, and it gives me chills because it's just the music for this game. Like, I thought Breath of the Wild had a very strong theme. I often like listening to the credit roll or staff roll music for Breath of the Wild. I thought that was really good. Tears of the Kingdom just kind of blows it out of the water. I think that and it even incorporates the old theme, which is also something that I like when they have little callbacks and little motifs that are taken from previous compositions when they make sense to do so. But it's very grand. When it comes to the main theme again, you've got you've got accents from all different kinds of music. You've got a very Asian section of the theme. You've got a very jazzy section of the theme. That the memes have been quite enjoyable to watch. By the way, I don't know if it is a saxophone or a clarinet, but it is one of those brass horns that could just be a keyboard for all I know. But it is one of those brass instruments that is quite jazzy, and you wouldn't think that you can have, like, I don't know. I think that's a flute. It's like almost like a Japanese flute they have at one point mixed in with either a saxophone or a clarinet, and it works somehow in the same song. I don't think I've ever heard those two instruments in the same piece, but we have it.
There's a very interesting stringed instrument, I think, that, or maybe it's a Japanese flute, or it's a Japanese stringed instrument, or Asiatic.
It's hard to tell. It really is just by listening.
Yeah.
But it's kind of what the first section sounds like, and then it goes into the ones with the brass, and goodness, the scene where Ganondorf is being sealed by Roru, and they bring in the classic Legend of Zelda theme. That gave me chills and goosebumps. I think that might be my favorite version of the Zelda theme, and there have been some fantastic renditions done, but that moment, like the music makes, I feel like the music really pushes the story to greater heights, and that you can see that in things like Star Wars. You see that in things like Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings. All these fantastic movies tend to have fantastic soundtracks, and there is a correlation there. The music playing during the final fight in the sky between Zelda Dragon and Ganondorf Dragon, that music is amazing. It's so gosh darn impressive. Like I can't. Composition of music is one of those skills that I'm just like, I know I'll never have, and I'm okay with it, but I'm just completely in awe of people that are able to just pull this stuff out of the ether and be like, here you go, you enjoy that. What were your thoughts on the music?
See, this is the funny thing. I specifically tapped you on the shoulder to talk about the music because for whatever reason, like I didn't have anything bad to say about it. Like the music that specifically hit me was actually the fairy troupe that was playing to the fairy. That was the one that I'm like, oh, that's really good.
Yep.
And then I'm sure there's one other one. But with OBS, I'm sure there's a very easy way to have the sound play to me and not come into just the main audio. But I got to the point where I just didn't want to mess with anything anymore. So while I was playing this, not like sometimes I was playing this and not recording, so I could have listened to stuff then, but maybe even my TV's quieter than I presume other TVs might be. But I just, when I was recording, I had the TV volume up a little bit, and the music, a lot of it, if you're just hearing the same stuff you heard in Breath of the Wild, your ears aren't really open for new things. You're just like, whatever. I am surprised at just how neutral I feel about the music. Nothing bad to say, nothing good to say. I think there's the reveal trailer for Breath of the Wild made me really wary of arrangements that I just kind of consider jarring. There's a moment where like it just seems like the music cuts out and then comes back in, but it's like, oh, that was intentional. I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. I don't know if I love that. So this one, honestly, I don't even know if I even heard it or took it into its completion. I'm sure I did. I like this one section with what I assume is some kind of Japanese violin, but the rewinding stuff, like I understand it's thematically good, but that seems experimental in a way that I'm not sure I could deal with. I didn't hate it. It was just more like compositions from like Spirit Tracks and Wind Waker and Ocarina, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess. I've a little more traditional, and I always like those ones. Specifically like Majora's Mask. It is funny to think about like Breath of the Wild, and this is kind of my criticism with the music, is a lot of the music is from Breath of the Wild, and I don't think Breath of the Wild soundtracks are really that incredible, which is a hard statement to make because it's like you look at all the original music in that game and it's 6 hours versus 45 minutes in Majora's Mask, and I'm like, is that all that's in Majora's Mask? I feel like you're hearing a new thing all the time, or like the music, I don't know, it's ever present in a way that isn't repetitive. It's just, it's a different style. So I think it's not that I dislike the music, it's that I don't like the decision to have the music take a back seat in Breath of the Wild and by extension Tears of the Kingdom. Like regardless how good the soundtrack is, if I'm not hearing it, then I don't really have opinions. If you go into the depths, and I talk about this later, and while it's thematically appropriate that the music is essentially just boom, 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 it's like, oh, it's like stalagmites forming. Whatever the music in the depths is, I'm just like, I don't like that.
Yeah, they call that atmospheric as opposed to thematic.
Yeah, melodic, whatever.
Yeah, I do like how there's a lot of bass used in the background of the Depths theme. Again, appropriate since you're at the lowest of the lows.
I think my main criticism with the music is just that it's not there as much as I want it to be, and compounded with co-author error of me just having it down all the time. And there's other things too. Sometimes if you're not having a good time, something that you should strike you just doesn't. Like I just came out of 5 caves in a row. Here's this beautiful theme. Whatever. So that's why I kind of had you talk about it, because it's just kind of a non-entity to me.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's 7 hours of it, and I could find good stuff, but I don't remember it. Other than the stable, like the musical troupe.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice.
Yeah, I did want to say one more positive thing, and then actually mention a few negative things I did have about just the sound in general. I liked how as you're falling out of the sky, it's kind of like this, downward high notes on a piano, kind of sliding down the scale and giving you adding to the sensation of falling and descending. And then as you're descending into a chasm, going down into the depths, it's the same thing, but now you're on the lower half of the keys. Oh yeah, and I think that's supposed to sync up as you enter into the giant chamber.
Yep.
As you finish going through the, and it works every single time in setting the mood. Now, negative though, and this is a holdover from Breath of the Wild. I've never liked the battle theme. I don't know. I don't understand the use of slide whistles, but I never like them when they're used. It's just kind of one of those things. I'm just like, don't use slide whistles. Especially when you're trying to convey like danger. It doesn't convey danger. To me, it conveys silliness. Like I've only ever heard slide whistles as something that's like, oh, you're trying to make a toddler laugh. Like not convey to a player that, hey, you're in the middle of a fight, you better watch yourself. So I think that's a mismatch thematically. And to that end, I always found it jarring when I do like the flourish that plays when you defeat a group of enemies and they were guarding a treasure chest that does not unlock until they're all defeated. It's got like a cool, like, just like strings and like being very animated, but then it gets cut off when, and again, another holdover from Breath of the Wild, when you hear like a boxing match bell go ding, ding, ding. It's just like, you ruin the whole thing. Just don't do that. Why are you using a boxing match bell? I mean, yes, I understand the fight is over, but the musical flourish is supposed to denote that, not... I'm just like...
Anachronism.
Where is the bell? Do they even have boxing in Zelda? Like, I don't think they've ever represented boxing in Zelda. This is not Punch-Out. This is Legend of Zelda. Keep the dumb bell out of there. So yeah, those two things, sound design wise, did bother me a bit.
I think the bell is just what I call a bigger issue of the death of fantasy prose, as I call it.
Yeah.
Where you watch a fantasy movie and you're like, why do you sound like you're from California? I'm done.
Oh, and here's another nitpick that has nothing to do with music, because you kind of cracked the door there. I really can't stand in fantasy or any fiction that's not supposed to be an expansion of the world we know when people use the term okay. Like, okay is very unique to how language developed in, our time and in our world.
Yeah.
Like if you're speaking English, in the fantasy world, that's fine, but don't use colloquialisms that don't make sense in that context. I think like the term okay is one of those.
Yeah, there's a lot of terms. Even the word thing. I never liked the word thing. Here's the thing. I'm like, nope, don't. I think that's one of them. But yeah, and that's... Gosh, I mean, we're not going to talk about God of War Ragnarok and how they talk and how it drives me insane. But, yeah, no, I mean, like weird little bells. Unless it's actually a giant bell that you're trying to hit with some kind of crazy contraption and you're paying a Goron to do it, then I'm like, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you, Stephen, for adding some kind of perspective on the music. I wouldn't have been able to do it. Yeah, tell me about gameplay, Stephen. You got some
Yeah.
things to say.
So I like to focus again on the new from Breath of the Wild and leaving out everything that serves as a framework for this game from the previous title. Not really gonna bring that up much here. I don't really have many complaints about Ultrahand. It did feel cumbersome at first, but it has since become almost second nature to just build and create devices. I can tell there was a lot of thought put into how it works, how you can see where the 2 points are going to connect to, even if you're on the other side of an object and you're trying to connect something that is completely blocked from view. You can still see, 2 points and them being connected by a line, and that line will follow the 2 points until you've moved too far, and then it will, I guess, snap to another 2 points that make the most sense. Although in certain aspects it's a little bit too freeform. I would like it to kind of snap to different places, but that's just kind of probably my OCD brain complaining too much. But yeah, once you get the hang of it, I feel like it becomes a really fun mechanic to play around with, and there's probably going to be entire YouTube channels based around what crazy thing did we make today.
It's already
Moving
gotten
on.
old for me.
I don't know. I keep getting a little tiny article saying, like, oh, this player made this crazy thing that can kill a Gleeok in 10 seconds flat. Moving on to Fuse, though, that does open the door for some neat combinations. I would say it does make the weapon breaking a bit more tolerable because it kind of makes sense a bit more now that weapons break, because you are going through them, and the fused items will also break before your main item breaks. It is a bit complicated how it affects the durability, but it does overall add to the durability of the weapon. So fusing is never a bad idea. It's just kind of, you got to be careful on what you're fusing and how strong of a weapon you want to have. It does fall short, though, I would say. I could just think of some truly great potential that you could use. I don't know. There's just some things that you feel like I should be able to fuse that, but you just can't. Whereas some things are completely useless. Like you can fuse an apple to a sword for no reason whatsoever, but I can't fuse an arrow to a weapon to, I guess, make it stronger or make it hurt more. Like just a free-floating weapon, or even a free-floating arrow, or even a bundle of arrows, and fusing that to something if it's on the ground. So the game is a bit picky on what you can and cannot fuse to it, and I thought that
very
was
arbitrarily.
Yeah, and considering you can fuse so many things to your weapons. And it also, goes on to shields, although shields, I'm seeing people fuse things to shields, and I'm just like, I never thought to do that. Fusing bomb flowers to them and then kind of doing the whole shield surfing move and having the explosion catapult you up into the air, and I thought that was pretty neat.
I tried that and it blew up, and I'm like, I don't know how they did it.
I did find completely on accident that if you take one of the elemental gemstones and fuse that, if they hit you, it kind of counters automatically with a ruby, an explosion, or topaz, it's like a blast of electricity that comes out of it.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
Does the topaz or the ruby exist after it's been hit, or does it blow up?
No, it keeps going.
Oh, good, because it's like that's a pretty expensive. I know the chews, like I think an enemy taught that you put a chew on the shield and it'll explode, but
right,
and then it's gone, which is it's a chew jelly. But
yeah, the ruby lasts for a long time, and I found that out just because I was trying to keep warm and I didn't have the Rito armor set yet, so I think I was doing a combination of, eating food to keep me warm, and then I also fused a ruby to my shield to keep me warm, because I was like, at first I was trying the weapon thing, but that just turns any weapon into like basically a staff to fling fireballs with, and you go through quite a few rubies that way. But the shield lasted for a long, long time. So yeah, those are fun fuses to make.
Wish I thought of
Ascend,
that.
yeah, Ascend is perfect. I can't. That is one of the abilities that I don't understand how it doesn't break the game. It seems like it should, yet it doesn't. And it's insane to me. Every time I use it, I also feel like I'm cheating. Like this is an ability that I should not have. I'm able to go up through ceilings, and I kind of feel like if they made that ability just to get out of caves, and then I thought, oh, this is so fun, and we should let players use it. It's clearly used in much of the game's design, that they probably had to go back and fix certain things and add things here and there.
Yeah, that's where I was saying, like, they probably move things around for something like Ascend.
Mm-hmm.
They must have had to, but I mean, nothing that would strike you. Just sort of banal environmental structure.
And puzzles too. Like a lot of the puzzles in the shrines are completely unsolvable without Ascend. So there's that. Rewind, I also feel the same way. It's kind of crazy when you consider everything that Rewind or Recall, I guess is what the game technically calls it. Recall keeps track of so many different objects at once. In a battle, when an enemy dies and they drop their weapons, or if they're carrying a whole bunch of apples or gemstones or meat in a basket behind them, and they all fly all over the place, the game remembers exactly their trail, and you can recall them back to where they were. It's kind of mind-boggling with that. But even when you take into account that you're using these abilities on familiar enemies from Breath of the Wild, like you've got the Stone Talus. The first game, you threw a remote bomb at him and detonated it, and he would go down. You can get on his back and start damaging him. You can't do that in this game unless you use the bomb flowers, which are consumable items this time around. So what else you do? Well, you can recall his arms, his boulder hands that he throws at you, and recall them back into him, and that will stun him, and you can do the same thing, but it is a different way to interact with enemies. And that kind of goes for pretty much everything. The Hinox is the same. You don't need abilities to take out the Hinox. The Sage avatars, I think that they are all helpful. They're a cool evolution of the Wolf amiibo in Breath of the Wild, and not everyone had the Wolf amiibo for Breath of the Wild, and unfortunately he doesn't work anymore. I think he just gives you meat now if you use that amiibo.
Some harsh implications to that. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know what they're getting at there. I don't think I want to know. But yeah, Breath of the Wild, you had a little AI controlled version of Wolf Link, and he had a certain number of hearts that were determined by, I want to say, your progress in the Cave of Ordeals in the Wii U version of Twilight Princess.
Like the Cave of Ordeals, just a new additional one where you were the wolf. But right, that sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I never did that, so I only ever had the three hearts, but he was pretty neat. He would kind of go up to a guardian and get himself killed pretty quick, but other than that, you could heal him maybe if you could give him some food before he died, and even if he did die, you could use him the next day. So that was neat. But that being said, these avatars are just that, but invincible. So they're a bit overpowered, and they attack a lot less than Wolflink did.
When you got all four of them, they seem to
gang up
anybody. Yeah.
They mess up my combos.
Yeah.
Or if I'm holding up a little tiny talus, I know they're not tiny taluses, but the small little pebble-like creatures, I've had a few occasions where I've picked one up and Yunobo hits it and makes it explode over my head and it damages me. So I don't know that they completely thought out their interactions with enemies and their timings, but that is what it is. The skydiving controls work well. There's a new suit that makes climbing in the rain better. Zonai devices are all over the place. You can use them for different kinds of traversal and unconventional weapons and traps. I personally think that there are enough new enemies. There's plenty of new mini-bosses and jobbers alike, especially when you go down to the depths and you find like the big frogs and then the little frogs enemies. You've got all the new constructs that you can fight. They fight in completely different ways compared to the bokoblins and moblin-like creatures. And even they do have new movesets because while they do have silly horns on their heads now, they do use them against you. So, I mean, that's good. They're not a complete waste and just completely, what's the term I'm thinking of?
Ornamental
or cosmetic.
Cosmetic, yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna say, like, they all do essentially the same thing. They ram you, or maybe they try to slice you if they're Lizalfos or Lionels. I mean, I don't know. The most interesting new enemy is the boss bokoblin because he makes all the other enemies behave in different ways. That's the one that's like interesting to me personally.
Yeah,
and he's just wholly new.
Yeah, and it took me a while to realize the infinite value of the Muddle Buds, because turning a boss bokoblin on his own troop is one of the funniest things to watch in the game. Or really any group of enemy. You just find the strongest enemy there, find a silver one, and use a Muddle Bud, and it will just start attacking his comrades for the next minute or so, and sometimes he'll take out all of them out. And that's really, really fun to watch. I think all the bosses are well designed. They're thematically satisfying. They are mostly fun to fight. I want to say they are quite easy, but when you consider that, you know, the developers, with the nature of the game being open world and you can tackle them at any given order, you do kind of have to design the enemies or the bosses rather, to be defeatable at pretty much any level of strength that Link currently has. If he's got, 4 hearts and 1 stamina wheel, you've got to make him just as easy to defeat as if you're completely maxed out. So I do understand why they made them a bit on the easy side. They're so much better than Breath of the Wild, and it's just with Breath of the Wild just kind of being the same boss with different movesets and weapons. They're just kind of like super enemies, but not really bosses.
Yeah, if you got the Master Sword too, you'd really just
tear through
ice them in like a. You'd have them enter their second phase in one go. Really, wasn't great.
Yeah. The ability to stick almost anything together and have it function is pretty mind-boggling to me. I got in the habit of, if I was let's say I was in the depths and I was hitting those large clusters of Zonite, and they'd all be falling in gloom, I would just use Ultrahand to stick them all together into one big, ugly-looking mass, bring them over to me, and then just collect them all up. And I think I started doing that with apples as well, just because it was quicker to get apples that way. But a lot of people were saying when this game was first revealed that, oh, this is just like Minecraft or other games that are creation oriented. And I feel like the comparisons just don't hold up when you see how it works in action. And Minecraft, to me, is just, you're just placing blocks. I mean, you're placing a lot of blocks, but you're not materializing anything in Breath of the Wild. So that's kind of a weird comparison that people would be making. So I feel like that's a really poor one to make.
It's a tenuous connection. It's more like it's not creatively speaking the same, but it's maybe more addressing the trend that existed prior, maybe.
Sure.
I was more thinking Fortnite. Fortnite's a little different because you're kind of building in squares, but you're going up and up, building on the go.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Using it for cover.
And Fortnite also adds a lot of like vehicles, and you don't make them, but it's sort of that kind of, I don't know, additional movement options that fly in and out of Fortnite. I've never played Fortnite.
Yeah.
Or Minecraft. So.
Me neither.
Yeah. So I don't have anything more to say on them, but I can see the comparisons anyway.
Yeah, and I think, speaking on that, I do think that there are enough different Zonai devices. I think there's a sweet spot that they hit where they give you enough to build anything with, and you can add non-Zonai devices to them if you can find them. So they're not limited to the set of, I don't know, there's like maybe 30 or 40 different kinds of Zonai devices that you can put together. But I feel like it's not overwhelming because they each have their uses that can't be replicated by another one. So to kind of wrap up the positives there is that it does take the ingenuity that Breath of the Wild was encouraging as far as like, you're trying to get across a ravine, chop down a tree and use it as a makeshift bridge. It takes that and just like cranks it up several notches. When it comes to some of the gameplay things that didn't quite hit for me, I felt that auto build wasn't as cool as I thought it could be. I didn't understand why, when you were using it, if you have the parts in your inventory, why wouldn't it just pull them out of your inventory? Like, you still have to pull them out of your inventory, then use auto build, but you're kind of doing half the work there as it is. So it kind of made it a bit not so auto on the build part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it is neat that Zonite can be used in lieu of having the parts. Some things are questionably very pricey and other things are very cheap. It is kind of strange how they weigh how much Zonite something is going to cost to make it. But so far I haven't relied on that aspect of it too much just because it tends to be way too pricey when I look into it. When it comes to the abilities, I still miss the remote bombs and Cryonis. I feel like their uses were many. I don't like having to have bombs be a consumable item now that I have to worry about running out of. Unobo does kind of replace the remote bombs, but still not quite. Doesn't quite have the same punch.
You gotta wait for him to charge back up.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of those, Sidon's ability is just awful. I think that's pretty much the consensus of everyone. They do not like Sidon's ability to make a water shield that you can shoot as a wave. And it just kind of, that along with the others just kind of highlight how much better the champion abilities were from Breath of the Wild. They did have a much longer cooldown time once you ran out of their uses, but I do feel that's probably a decent trade-off for them. And real quick, the dungeons I felt weren't as good as the Divine Beasts, and a lot of people did not like the Divine Beast dungeon, so that's kind of two steps back as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people kept saying, "Oh, they returned to the normal dungeon formula," and I'm thinking, when was the last time you played a conventional Zelda? Because no, this is not a conventional.
12 years ago, apparently.
It's a gauntlet. They're really just, all of them are just gauntlets to find 4 or 5 keys, use them, and then you get to fight the boss. But it's nothing. They're not challenging. I mean, some of the themes are kind of neat, like you had mentioned that you like the use of the mirror shield or the mirroring capabilities in the lightning temple. I thought the low
Yep.
gravity was pretty neat in the water temple. I liked the environment of the wind temple being up on a ship in the sky. I thought that was neat. And also just the Gerudo Desert. I don't know why, but it's even emptier than it was in Breath of the Wild. There's just not a lot going on in the desert this time around.
Yeah. The problem I have with this game is I would never stick around to explore areas I'd been to. So I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm sure there's stuff here. I'm booking it to the final dungeon, to the final boss. Bye. So I'll have to take your word for that.
Some of us are still playing the game.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm going to touch on some of these things on my own, so I'm not going to get too into it. I was just say, quote the famous line, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. When people said, oh, the dungeons are returned to form, I'm like, who told you that? why do you think these are the same? Because they're firmly set in the ground, they have footings? I'm like, yeah, I guess they do, but they just don't operate like a dungeon. And a lot of people are saying it's like, you really can't make a traditional dungeon with any kind of non-linearity. That's probably the takeaway from this game and Breath of the Wild. If you want a traditional dungeon, you kind of have to make it exempt from non-linearity. But I think the dungeons might be a draw. Well, that's probably not true. I thought Boris in the first game was pretty meaty enough. I mean, it only took like 25 minutes, but when I think I did Rudania, this was like my third playthrough in like 7 minutes. I'm like, okay, 25 isn't terrible. The thing I liked about the Divine Beasts, because they were different, but they actually had cause to be different. Like they're a big physical moving object, and they always had some kind of mechanic, which could be basic or not, tying all the puzzles together. Mm-hmm. In this game, it's just like, I don't know, there's 5 of them. Go over here. There, and there. And
it's like, go to a part of the temple you haven't been to. You'll probably find what you're looking for.
Yeah. Usually just, it's one of those things where I'm like, kind of wish I could just hit the A button on these special nodes instead of having to fight the champion or the sage to be in a position so I could activate their power to then activate the switch. That's a small thing, but initially it was not. The dungeon thing, it just makes me think everyone else is wrong. I'm the only one who's right, because I'm like, yeah, those aren't real dungeons. They have the right wallpaper to be them, and I'm surprised that you didn't care for the sand, the lightning temple, because it has that mirror shield stuff, and they use the same device, which is essentially just a big light source that you then like project onto a little a meter, if you will. Mm-hmm. You fill it up and then it goes. But I thought they had some pretty good ones there, such as the one where you have to stick a stake in the wall to stop the giant cylindrical, whatever you want to call it, wall from spinning about, and what's the word, obscuring that thing that you need to shine the light onto. I thought that was pretty good. I had a moment where in the lightning dungeon, if I had turned on Ultrahand, I would have just found the source or what to do. It's just some bricks you need to move for the first node, whatever you want to call it, lightning bell, something like that. And instead of doing that, I just went all the way to the basement, used Ascend, and I'm like, here I am. And now I'm like, now that I'm here, they probably wanted me to get out somehow. And then I just kind of reverse engineered getting out. I liked the lightning dungeon. Every other dungeon, I was like, the water temple looks like any other island. And it was like 20 minutes long. Here's one thing. I don't like the de-emphasis of combat in these dungeons. Like there's the robots to fight, but I don't know. I've never liked fighting robots anyway. but they're easily ignorable. Like, in Ocarina of Time, you go into the room, then you had a mini boss, or you had the Lizalfos that bark at you, and then you have to do your little duck with the Hylian shield so not to get schwacked. Little more emphasis on combat in traditional Zelda dungeons, and a lot of it has to do with the use of a linear design, whether it be find the path or follow the path. It's going to progress in linear fashion. But these dungeons, the Divine Beasts were better. The bosses, I'll get into it more. The bosses are better as well, but there's one exception to that. One boss in Breath of the Wild I really liked because he was just a monster. Yeah.
I did not care for the Muktarok, if I can interject that.
No, I think you have to find him funny or something. You're like, oh yeah, every Zelda game usually has this kind of diminutive little gremlin that it's kind of for humor. With Fuse, I'm going to get into the one thing that I didn't like is that unless you're fusing high damage elements to your main weapons, like your sword, outside of a few uses, like very specific use cases, you're kind of wasting good sword handles. And so with Breath of the Wild, it was sort of the same thing where you're just getting some weapons have more damage potential, some have durability up, some you can throw. I don't know if that's really useful, but okay. Definitely not what I'm looking for, but I was very taken with the fact that you could fuse a shield onto a sword and then you could do a parry like you were William Wallace with that big claymore. And then it's like, actually, you're kind of foregoing a lot of good damage input. And the sword's not going to break right away. Usually the shield does. There's like some kind of internal logic where it's like item on item stuff. The one item will give way. But if it's like material on item, then it all just goes at once. But it just seemed like an extra step where in Breath of the Wild, if you kill the Silver Bokoblin, he never had a bad weapon. They always seem to have royal broadswords, or the Black Bokoblins had Dragonbone clubs always, and so down the line, and they would have their own various stats. It was kind of randomized, but you'd fish around, see what was best, and held on to that. With Fuse, there's enough different things you can do with it that it's reductive to say it's just an extra step. But when it comes to just making powerful weapons, it does feel like an extra step. So I think I'll leave it there. Next thing I'm going to talk about, though, and you already touched on it, but I'm going to get a bit negative here. And yeah, you touched on the idea that the game is triple the size of Breath of the Wild as far as content goes. And therefore, people complaining about reusing the surface are giant whiner babies. This is factually not true. Factually not true.
Objectively.
Or objectively not true. Yeah, and whatever it is. It's true that the surface area is triple. If the sky had a surface, volume area, I don't I don't know. But let's say the sky has a surface. It's triple the surface area. But as far as content, neither of them, that being the depths or the sky, have a lot of content. With the sky, it's quite comically immediate just how little there is. Like, even when you open it up, it's like, there's an island over here, and there's an island over here, and then there's a little clump over here. And I actually like how far away they are, but just on initial viewing, you're like, oh. I opened this giant section of the map, and there's 4, maybe 5 islands in it, in this entire region. But yeah, with the sky, it's quite immediate. What with every time you launch from a tower, you land on the same 4-spoke isle outfitted, with the same launcher device and winch that you used to get to the same circular boss arena to fight the same flux construct. Is that what they're called?
Yep.
I never got their name right. To fight the same flux construct to obtain the same green crystal, and maybe an old map too, if you're lucky. From there, you might trek to a Blossom Isle, which I ahead of time started taking pictures of that. I'm like, this will probably be important, and you get money for it. You got money from lots of things. I don't really see why these Blossom Isles are very important, though. You do learn things about the royal family, so there's a little bit of flavor dialogue. I guess there's that, but really, you're doing it for the money. Link's a very pragmatic human being. Let's be real. Yeah, so you might go to that same Blossom Isle, which there's like 30 of them or 20 of them. They all look the same. Sometimes they fall out from under you just as a good laugh. And then you might go to a water basin isle or a tiny island that once housed a house, but now broken down to the footings. Also one of many. Even the unique islands are usually one of 3 or more. The mazes, the curly fry islands, the globes. It feels like there might be 6 wholly unique isles in this game. I'm not quite sure, though. Wasn't counting, and it seems actually hard to find. I probably should have just looked on Google, but a full map screen of the Sky Island, or the sky. I've already gone on a bit of a tangent, but to go on a bit of another tangent, why is the Great Isle all by itself in its size category? And why is so much of its space seemingly wasted? I think it would have been wise to give you reasons to go back to sorry, my notes are killing me now. I gotta go off script here. It would have been wise to give you reasons to go back to there. Say some locks that needed keys, literal or figurative, because it feels so important just due to its very on its own nature, and yet there's less there than there was on the Great Plateau. There was certain things I found after the fact, like there's a mine down there, which I never found during the tutorial, but aside from a boss and apparently a bonfire quest, I don't really know what the Great Isle's doing there. It seems unused. And it's the only big island there, but I don't think that space is really well utilized. Maybe that's the point. Maybe maybe they're borrowing from Team Eco, having this sacred, set apart, empty place. Who's to say? The only other isle of greater size I can think of is the Great Sky Forge, or whatever it's called. And after I tell you my story about getting there and all that, I'm sure you'll agree it was a lot of fuss, a lot of muss with no real reward. Did you go to the Great Sky Forge, Stephen?
Eventually, but I don't quite remember what its purpose is.
Well, that's very telling. Yes, it's very big. It's a giant Jack and the Beanstalk tower, castle, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, yeah.
And I was about 10 hours in, maybe 15. I saw one of those square platforms and 10 rockets, and that was like really far away and really high up. I don't know how high up it is. It feels higher up than everything else, and I'm like, I think I can get there. And so I started my little hour-long thing of compiling Zonai bits, mostly rockets and some fans and whatever else to do that. And I think 3 tries in, I got to it, and like it was that thing where the thing's blinking on me, the platform that I got there on. I didn't use a wing or anything. And I just grabbed onto like the base of the island and started climbing. And from there, I didn't see any immediate entrance or landing, so I just kept going from the foot of the rock. And I used springs, I used my stamina stuff, and I really got an appreciation for how big that place was. And then eventually I got to the top and I found like a very closed, like portcullis-esque in-build hatch. And I thought to myself, I'm like, maybe I found a dungeon. This place seems big enough to be a dungeon. And, I got all the way here and now they're not letting me through. It turns out that, had I rounded the corner on the island, I would have just found a very simple activation switch, which just makes these very massive towers. I mean, very massive. Like they were so massive that like my wheel and a half of stamina and whatever I was using just wasn't cutting it. They just blow some air out and then you just float to the top in 2 seconds. Some people like the fact that, I had my own little adventure with it, or that they would. I don't necessarily. It was like, oh, well, my very calculated approach to this isle was actually kind of pointless. It's still fun that I did it that way, but you get to the top of lickety split, and then, with this big, immense isle, you go through a little mini game of lasers, and then you get to a shrine, and then that's it. It's like what's the point of this place? And, Breath of the Wild had that kind of thing going too. I think it was sort of reveling in it. It's like, this place just exists to exist. This is a big, great dragon. Why is it here? I don't know. It's just kind of there to look at. Or, the Colosseum. It's like, what is this? And, there's really no, there's no mechanical or extrinsic reason for it to be there other than to just revel in its ancientness and size.
Hey, there are a lot of YouTubers that would not have any content to make if they didn't make things so cryptic.
Yeah, oh gosh, I mean that's really what it comes down to. You have a huge canyon with this forgotten temple, but in this game it's like this huge Jack and the Beanstalk castle, so big I thought it might be a dungeon. It's like, there's shrine there. It's like it's called this forge. Do I have to like fire up the forge? Nah. Like, what do I do? And then you leave, and I guess that's kind of a microcosm for this entire the sky. So really, the thing about the sky was traveling through the sky is fun. Requires logistics, planning, and experimentation. So while what's at the end of your flight will very likely be underwhelming, the flight itself is quite nice. One of the things I wanted to do and didn't was take in all of Hyrule, north to south, coast to coast, all at once from the air. Don't think I ever got high enough to do that. Being in the sky. I mean, again, there's nothing really in there, but it's nice to get everything in perspective. I can appreciate that. There's other things I could say about the sky, such as the benefit of the increased verticality for exploration and traversal, but I shan't. Point is like they made this big thing, it's on the box cover, and there's really just not much happening. Favorite
music isn't all that great either. There,
no, it's
the same track.
I think it kind of grew on me, but maybe that's because it was like in-game nostalgia, where I'm like, I haven't been in the sky in a while. This is I think I remember it actually kind of unsettling me. I'm like, what is this weird yellow autumn forever place? Why is there nothing here? But yeah, that's the sky. As for the depths, I have very little to say other than they should have just made a large cave system. I think that would have been a way better idea, with both vast caverns and tiny bottlenecks. Fill it with treasure and monsters. what we got, I consider to be a bad attempt at a dark world. Fact that you pointed out, Stephen. Hadn't even thought about it like that. Where its only value is scattered trinkets and ore mines, and seemingly only populated by two-man Yiga encampments and small derelict mines. Though let's not forget the numerous but interchangeable bokoblin mining camps, which, after knocking over the 20th one, I was ready to work out some protection arrangement with these hapless Muppets. I mean, I'm serious. Like, I thought about it. You're like, they should have just added like I don't know what you call it, like an economy system where you just get these mines working so you don't have to just pick up Zonai from the ground endlessly. And it's just sort of trickling into your inventory. I feel like that would have been a fine way to replenish, this very finite resource, which apparently you kind of need for everything. But yeah, it's just like, I don't know, this is the same mine, kill the same moblins. That's what's in the depths. Aside from one new enemy, I didn't think there was any real unique encounters or anything of prevailing interest. In my playthrough, chasing down one particular fat feller was the driving force for going down there, but that concluded in disappointment as far as I was concerned. He tells you where someone is, and you're like, well, why wouldn't he be there? Like, of course he's there. it's the one place I haven't gone to in the entire game. Yes, I know Ganondorf's at probably Hyrule Castle, above or below. Thank you.
That's where you saw him in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's like, why would he move anywhere else? Of course he's going to be there. He was there in Breath of the Wild. It's like, yeah, that I did see one review where they were like, oh my goodness, it was such a revelation. And I was like, why? Of course he was going to be there.
Yeah. Like, it was the one place I would just never go. I'm like, I don't want to beat the game by accident again. So, I don't know. I don't actually love Koga as a character. The most interesting thing I saw about him recently was like, oh, it's like that's the voice they gave him in Age of Calamity, eh? Or is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's not bad. It's just different. I think he's too weird and too jokey for me to take seriously. And I don't mind the occasional jokey enemy or comic relief, but yeah. Anyway, that's what I did down in the depths. There's lots of incentive to be down there, but to be down there, you do well to have material from both the caves and the sky. Just as in the sky, it benefits you to have been underground. I think the designers did well to establish such a codependent relationship between the three planes. But given how tedious above and below might be and how easy it is to circumvent the game's soft gating, it's perfectly fine to ignore them, especially when they fail to house truly meaningful content. Also, concerning the depths, the music, as I already alluded to, is clearly inspired by the formation of stalagmites via water droplets, which, while appropriate, is incredibly boring. Visually, there's no real draw distance, even with light seeds, which has a certain charm to it. But more importantly, the asset uniformity throughout the depths entirety makes for a very dull visual journey. It's not very stimulating to be down there for long stretches. Even the developer acknowledges this by the amount of chasms dotting the landscape. It's clearly a very in-out. Ram bam, thank you, ma'am. For me, I don't know if I was down there all that many times, but like when I was down there, I was maybe down there for like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? I think my first recorded playthrough, I was down there for a while. And after that, there was one recording I had where I was just in the depths, ended with a Koga fight. And I'm like, that's not worth it. We'll just scrap the entire thing. I really didn't get a lot of value out of the depths. I got a lot more value out of the sky, even though the sky has a lot of the same problems, but there's something worthwhile in the sky. One thing about the depths, this is a significant digression, but it's interesting to think about the games that have been successful with Dark Worlds versus the games that have been unsuccessful. You have Link to the Past, Link Between Worlds, Oracle of Ages, some other examples I can't think of, versus Metroid Prime 2. We know everybody loves the Dark World and Echoes, but, definitely has some problems. And then there's Twilight Princess, which isn't really the same thing, but, you have Twilighted over sections early on, and I like those sections, but even then, I'm not going to admit that those are the high points of that game. Like, they have their thing, but it doesn't last long. But, there's another example of it. And then now Tears of the Kingdom. This may not be a revelation to people, but it was to me somewhat. I first noticed the duality of the depths and the surface by comparing the map screens, which are top-down orientated naturally, just like Link to the Past and the other games like Link Between Worlds and Oracle of Ages, or isometric, if you will. This demonstrates that for the third-person/first-person games, when you're in the game space, corollaries between the two dimensions or artifacts of one present in the other, whether it be topographical mirroring or inversing or even just a unique tile texture, you'll be hard-pressed to see it unless you stop and look hard. But for Link to the Past and Oracle of Ages, it'll catch your attention, like close to a thorn bush. A lot of the time anyway. Sometimes it's appropriately devious, but there's still that little switch in your brain. There's still that recognition. So I suppose my point is that a dark world or inverse world might not be appropriate in Tears of the Kingdom from the go. I don't know if you have any contributions to that little thought I had, or anything else, Stephen.
I do like where the main purpose of the depths and by extension collecting Zonite leads to. I did like kind of discovering how the Zonite and the charges and how that relationship would lead you to having a bigger battery compartment, and that kind of leads into this gameplay loop of going to get more Zonite, exchange the Zonite for more charges, exchange the charges for bigger battery capacity, and the bigger the battery capacity you would get, the more capable you are of using Zonite devices, which you can then use to get more Zonite in the depths. And then once you max out your battery, I don't know if you got to this point or not, but when you go to the forges where you can increase your battery capabilities, they then allow you to exchange, I believe you can then exchange the charges for as currency for whatever Zonite parts you want. So instead of having to rely on the randomness of those dispensaries that you find mostly in the Sky Islands, you can just pick and choose which ones you want at the expense of charges, which no longer serve their purpose once you max out your battery. So I did like how that aspect of the gameplay loop ends in something where it's like, oh, okay, well now I can really cut loose as far as using these Zonite devices and kind of feel like I can still engage in that loop and be rewarded for doing that. So I did like that part of the depths. And I even did like the idea of how, when you have mountains on the surface, you have valleys in the depths, and vice versa. You have mountains in the depths and you have valleys on the surface. Or if there's water on the surface, then that means you've got an impassable wall that you've got to find a way around to get to different areas on the depth. So I did like the navigation aspect of it, and I even don't really care mostly for dark areas in games. So for it to kind of pull me in and give me the chase of the light roots, and then having the light roots directly correlate to a shrine above ground, it helped me find the shrines, because the Purapad wasn't doing much of that for most of my playthrough. So that's kind of what I had to rely on, was to go down to the depths, find light roots, then go up, get the shrine, and then go back down. And yeah, there is a very there's a lot of motivation for you to, like you said, go between the sky, the surface, the depths, in a lot of ways. It is unfortunate that when you start, right now I'm in the side quests part and just trying to do as many side quests as I can. It is unfortunate that most of them just stay on the surface. There was one that led me back into the Sky Islands, which it kind of stumped me for a bit because I was looking for somebody and they'd gone to the Sky Islands, but I'm thinking, okay, there's no way this person would be in the Sky Islands because all of these side quests keep me firmly planted on the surface. I don't go into the depths, don't go into the sky. I can solve this whole thing by sticking to the surface, and occasionally they'll throw you the curveball. But I would have liked to see that done more. That would have really felt like getting closer to the claim of, oh, well, the game has been tripled in size. Well, not when you really only use the sky for a couple of things and you only use the depths for a couple of things, and then most of your time is going to be spent on the surface. It does seem like a little bit of a waste of space. And despite all the cool things that are down in the depths just kind of seem like the hard mode of the game, especially when you can, find those multiple coliseums where you're doing a survival mode. There's a lot of combat down there. You can I really love the fact that you can refight all of the temple bosses down in the depths. They all have different arenas where you can engage in a rematch with them. So that's nice. So it's not a wasted idea, but I do feel like it was underutilized and underdeveloped. It could have been made into something really cool, like low rule in A Link Between Worlds. And it's kind of weird that a lot of people were shocked because Nintendo hid this. They actually hid the depths in the marketing. They did not tell really anyone that, oh, there's this whole underworld that's the same size as the rest of Hyrule. And maybe, I think that's probably a good thing that they did, because of what it is, where you're not going to spend that much time down there. Even if you clear everything down there, you're going to spend, I would say, a fifth of your game time is going to be spent down in the depths. I feel like a fifth of your time is going to be spent in the sky, and then the other 3/5 are going to be on the surface, which you spent an entire game already if you played through Breath of the Wild. So yeah, a lot of it is.
I think a fifth is generous for the sky, personally, but I get what you
mean.
Maybe a significantly less amount of time in each of them. The thing about the depths is it's actually sort of the mean-spirited game design that I sometimes like. Like, I look at the Faron area and I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to bypass any of these rivers. I think, and so and I don't look stuff up. Like, I ruined Earthbound for me, and even Majora's Mask to a sense, looking things up. But so I'm just trying to get around these rivers, and you definitely see the correlation, but it's more like you have to really be looking for it early on. You're like, huh, these tree distributions are the same here, and this one lake looks like this essentially rock basin down here that I can't get through. So I enjoyed that there was a little more harsh navigation, but it's just not interesting outside of that. And there's that economy connection, but I don't really want to be down there. And the fact that you really have one new enemy and it's little babies, and then the other enemies, they have an added attribute to them, but they're all the same enemies. From above. It's think about Link to the Past Dark World, and how every sprite's different, and there may be corollaries between this pig man and that soldier, but then even then there's different behaviors that they do, so all new different sprites. Certainly some layout overlay intentionally, but then there's lots of other things. It's this is a desert here, it's a swamp over here. Really, it just tells you it was quite remarkable that they just kind of hit that idea out of the park in 1991, 1992. And I don't think they do it here. Just like, yeah, there's reasons to be down there, but in and of itself, it's not interesting.